Good morning, everyone. That was just to grab your attention here. We are starting this meeting, and our first speaker, unfortunately, has some technical issues. We all know how that feels, so we will slightly change the program. But first, I want to welcome you to this intergroup session on the preparing of the 19th Conference of Presidents to CITES and on trophy hunting. So two topics, so a lot of work to do. Before we start this interesting program, I would like to highlight some practical aspects. This meeting is streamed on Interactio. The meeting will be recorded. The video recording and the presentations will be uploaded to the Intergroup website afterwards. There is English, French, German, Italian and Polish interpretation available here in the room. However, speakers that join us remotely cannot be interpreted due to a part strike of the interpreters. And of course, I think we are all very much willing to show our solidarity with the interpreters here. Given the relatively short time that we have at our disposal, I would like to ask all of my colleagues, I know it's difficult, but please be brief with your questions and statements. The first part of this meeting, we will discuss the preparation of the 19th meeting of the Conference of Parties to CITES, and we are delighted to hearing from first Daniela Freyer. She is coordinator of the Species Survival Network, the European Regional Bureau, and she will give a presentation on the COP19 priorities from a conservation and animal welfare perspective. After her presentation, then we are delighted to hear from Mr. Jorge Rodriguez Romero, Deputy Head of the Unit Multilateral Environmental Cooperation at DG Environment, and he will share the EU priorities for CITES COP19. Then my colleague Ville Ninisto, who is the co-rapporteur on behalf of the Greens EFA group, will speak then on the ENVI draft motion for a resolution on the EU strategic objectives for CITES COP19. And the second part of this meeting will be dedicated to another important topic. We will talk about trophy hunting. Mr. Rodriguez Romero will then be back with us and will tell us more about the biodiversity strategy for 2030. And he will try to reconcile with the current EU trophy hunting practices. After he is finished, we will continue with Dr. Joanna Schwab. She is the Senior Director of Public Affairs in the Humane Society International European Office, and she will give an insight on how to strengthen the EU regime for the import of hunting trophies. I will now give the floor first to Ms. Daniela Freyer to give her presentation. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anja, for inviting me and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Pro-Wildlife and the Species Survival Network, which is a coalition of more than 80 NGOs from around the world, cooperating specifically on CITES and protection of wildlife from trade. Today's unprecedented biodiversity loss has been identified as one of the greatest threats to the planetary boundaries, and direct exploitation of species, for example, through fishing, logging or hunting, is a major driver of that biodiversity loss. This is where CITES, the Conference on International Trade in Endangered Species, comes in as the only available tool to protect species from overexploitation for international trade. The European Union plays an important role at CITES, both because of its voting power and also as an important market for many species. The 19th Conference of the Parties to CITES will decide on 52 proposals suggesting trade restrictions or in some cases even trade bans for almost 600 species, while for 9 species less restrictive trade regulations are being proposed. First slide, please. We welcome specifically the 13 proposals co-sponsored by the EU, including the 2 important proposals to protect requiem and hammerhead sharks, several proposals to better protect plants, reptiles, and amphibians. In addition to these species proposals, the CITES parties will also discuss almost 90 agenda items for which working documents have been submitted on the interpretation, implementation, and enforcement of the Convention, which is equally important. It, for example, concerns issues such as breeding of species or transport of live animals. In the following, I would like to highlight a few issues that we consider to be priorities from a conservation and animal welfare perspective. Next slide, please. So the first species I'd like to talk about is also likely to be the most controversial issue, as in previous conferences, the African elephant. There have been 2 conflicting proposals submitted, one by Zimbabwe to reopen commercial ivory trade, and one other by 5 countries to transfer all elephants' populations, specifically those in 5 countries in which they are currently listed in Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. We urge the EU to support this listing of all elephants in Appendix 1, which would create clarity that all ivory trade needs to be ended permanently. It would also be in line with global efforts to close domestic ivory markets and to reduce demand for ivory. We are, however, concerned that at past conferences of the parties to CITES, the EU failed to support the Appendix 1 listing of all elephants, although overall savanna elephant populations have suffered a marked decline, mostly as a result of ongoing poaching for ivory trade. We also request the EU to support several working documents that have been submitted on elephants. One of them would increase pressure on those countries that still have open legal ivory markets, such as Japan, to close these ivory markets. And we also urged to support the EU the destruction of existing ivory stockpiles to reduce incentives to trade in ivory in the future. This CITES conference also offers the unique opportunity to finally end the destructive practice of exporting elephants caught from their herds in the wild to zoos and other captive facilities. This important issue should be resolved at COP19 as a matter of urgency, as suggested in a working document by several African range states. We think it should not be deferred to the next COP 3.5 years further down the road, as suggested in a document that was submitted by the EU. The next species I'd like to introduce and urge the EU to support stronger protection for is the common hippopotamus. 10 African countries are proposing to uplist this species from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, which would ban all commercial international trade. The population of hippos stands at only 150 to 130,000 animals. That's actually a third of the African elephant population. And the hippo population has declined markedly by more than 30% in 30 years. The actual population numbers may even be lower, as population data are outdated and, for example, are 20 years old for Tanzania, one of the major exporters. The hunting of hippos for meat and ivory trade, partly as a substitute to ivory from elephants, is a major threat to the species. And international trade is indeed significant, with body parts of an estimated 14,000 hippos traded in the last decade. The EU is actually a major importer of teeth and ivory carvings from hippos, and we hope it will take responsibility accordingly and support this proposal. Moving on from the big and heavy species to the smaller species, which are of course equally important, I would like to address the trade in various species for the pet trade. The capture of millions of animals from the wild every year, including ornamental fishes, reptiles, amphibians, birds and mammals, makes the pet trade a highly significant welfare and conservation problem. Also, it is worth noting that again, the EU is a major market for species traded as pets. Actually, almost half of the proposals submitted to the CITES conference, namely 24, aim to better protect species that are traded as pets and that cover a total of 245 species. One prominent example are glass frogs. Slide is the right one, thank you. These species, because of their attractive appearance and their transparent bodies, are in high demand for the pet trade. And 14 countries from the Americas and Africa are now proposing to list this entire family of species, covering 158 species, in Appendix 2 of CITES to bring the trade under international control for the first time. As trade is unspecific and the different glass frog species are difficult to distinguish from each other, the proposal covers the entire family. 70% of the glass frog species are in decline, and some species are highly threatened with extinction. Moreover, glass frogs are protected at national level in many range states, and many specimens sold in the EU have presumably been collected illegally. International cooperation is therefore urgently required to assist parties, range states, in protecting this group of species. And we strongly urge the EU to support these efforts and vote in support of the proposal. Unfortunately, the EU failed this group of species in the past when it voted against a similar proposal at COP18 in 2 votes in committee and plenary. So next slide, please. I would also like to highlight 2 important working documents, which are of priority both from a conservation, animal welfare, and health perspective. Firstly, as a result of the pandemic, CITES parties will discuss whether CITES has a role in reducing the risk of future zoonotic disease emergence associated with the international wildlife trade. And we urge for the adoption of a resolution at this conference which will incorporate the One Health approach into CITES implementation as a matter of urgency. This is even more important as unhygienic, inhumane conditions in the wildlife trade and the mixing of species create ideal conditions for the spread of pathogens. Secondly, we very much welcome that parties will discuss at this conference the transport conditions for live animals, elephants as well, but also all live animals. We encourage the EU to support this working document and to support the rules on transport are strengthened and expanded to apply consistently across the entire trade chain to reduce animal mortality, cruel treatment and damage to health as required by the Convention. Finally, what are our recommendations? Given the biodiversity crisis, there is a clear need for more ambition to better protect species from overexploitation for trade, applying a precautionary and strictly science-based approach. The vast majority of species that are being traded is actually not listed in CITES yet, and no international trade regulations apply to them, even if they are highly endangered species sometimes. Therefore, the EU, as a major market and consumer of such species, should increase its own initiative to list new species on the CITES appendices and also, importantly, support initiatives by other countries for increased protection. Next slide, please. What could be a role for the European Parliament with regard to the CITES conference? On the CITES level, we request parliamentarians to support strong and ambitious EU positions via the draft EP motion for a resolution, which is currently being debated, and by sending an EP delegation to the 19th Conference of the Parties. On the EU level, there's more that parliamentarians can do by urging for an ambitious, revised wildlife trade action plan, the action plan against wildlife trafficking, which will probably be finalized by the end of the year, and urge for appropriate implementation of that action plan, which is equally important, of course. Also, we urge for the adoption of EU-wide policies that are more precautionary than CITES, specifically given that many species are not listed and that trade is not controlled into the EU currently. One such example would be the adoption of a positive list approach, which 19 member states recently expressed their support for, which we very much welcome, of course, and which is justified from a conservation, animal welfare, and health perspective. Also, parliamentarians could urge for adopting stricter measures on closing existing loopholes in the EU wildlife trade regulations by prohibiting trade of species, for example, that are protected nationally in their own states. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have either here at these meetings, or please don't hesitate to send me an email if you should want any more information. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniela, for your presentation. It gave a very informative oversight. We will do the questions after the next two presentations. So I will now give the floor to Mr. Jorge Rodriguez Romero, Deputy Head of the Unit of Multilateral Environment Cooperation at DG Environment. He will present the EU priorities for COP19. I believe the technical issues are solved, so he will join us online. Mr. Rodriguez, whenever you're ready, you can start your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And I'm really sorry for the technical difficulties. My computer decided to stop working just at the very time of the start of the meeting, and I had to reboot. But I was able to join just when the Daniela Freire was starting her presentation. So I thank you very much for raising very important points. And thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Intergroup and the European Parliament Intergroup for inviting me to present the preparations for the CITES COP. So as I think, as you all know, the international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants worth billions of euros. I think is very important for many economies and ranges from live animals and plants to products derived from them of many different nature. At the same time, wildlife trafficking is one of the most profitable forms of organized crime, which has devastating impact on biodiversity and rule of law. So effective regulation of international wildlife trade plays a very important role in fighting against species extinction and ensuring sustainability of the trade. And the EU has been actively engaged in advocating for strict global rules on wildlife trade and in the implementation of CITES through the EU wildlife trade regulations. We have, as it has been mentioned, we are at the moment revising the EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking, which is one of the main tools that we have in the EU to ensure implementation and enforcement of the rules. We have earlier this year made a proposal to the Council for submission by the EU of a range of species and groups of species for a listing in the CITES appendixes. We have proposed 2 species of reptiles, 2 amphibians, 1 group of sharks, 1 group of marine invertebrates, 5 species or groups of species of trees, and 1 species of plants. These 12 species or groups of species have been sent to the CITES Secretariat as EU proposals. In addition to that, to those proposals, which are many have been co-sponsored by range states, and I have to highlight that we have, before making those proposals, carried out extensive consultation with range states in the last 1.5 years. In addition to that, as I said, several third countries, partner countries, approached the EU requesting to co-sponsor other proposals. And after examining those requests and with the time available, it was decided to co-sponsor the proposal from Panama on wrecking sharks. So this has been also added to the submission that we sent to the CITES Secretariat by the deadline of the 17th of June. I have to stress that the fact that we are not co-sponsoring at this point in time, it doesn't mean that we are not going to support, that the EU is not going to support. Of course, in some cases, we have been requested to co-sponsor with very short time, and we have had some exchanges with the proponents, but we have not been able to reach a clear conclusion on some of these proposals. So it was decided not to co-sponsor. So the Council decided not to co-sponsor some of these proposals. But at the moment, we have all the proposals from all CITES parties have been published in the CITES website. There are, as it has been mentioned by Danielle in her presentation, proposals for around 600 species, so more than 50 proposals for listings, and we are starting a very intense work to analyze all these proposals, as well as the working documents, which are again many covering many aspects of CITES implementation and protection of a wide range of species that are not listing proposals, but are also very important for the implementation of CITES. Well, we are examining all these proposals and all these documents in order to propose to the Council an EU position on this matter. In this sense, we very much value this opportunity to have an exchange with the European Parliament and with experts from NGOs. We also are organizing next week a consultation with the stakeholders in order to get their views on the proposals. And we will organize also another one in September, together with the Czech presidency of the Council. I would like also to mention that we have also submitted, the EU has submitted a document on trade in live elephants. We consider it necessary to bring more clarity to the rules governing trade in live elephants. In particular, I mean, we consider that the trade in live elephants, be it commercial or not, should be done in a very transparent manner and generate conservation benefits and respect proper handling and care of these animals. And it should only go to appropriate and acceptable destinations. And there are different interpretations by parties on the rules, the existing rules. And I think it is essential to clarify this in a way that such trade is governed by the principles of transparency and also scientifically based decisions. And I think what we are proposing, the EU is proposing, is to explore with all different parties the options to make these rules more robust, more transparent, and more scientifically based. So we have proposed to launch an intersessional work to clarify these rules. It is not that we want to defer the decision to the COP20. I think as much as we can agree at COP19, we would be very keen to have an agreement. But what we believe is that the issues is very contentious and complex, and we may need more time. So that's why we are proposing this intersessional period. But issues such as clarification of the issue of reservations, for example, it might be that we will be able to reach some agreement at COP19. What I think is very important is to realize that this is a very divisive matter especially among African states, and we have to find the space to have a constructive discussion in order to find a solution that is widely supported. We shouldn't, I think, push solutions that are not properly discussed and considered by all parties. We also find it important that in this context where there is it's a very important year, this year for biodiversity. We have the Conference of the Parties on the Convention of Biological Diversity, where that will take place in Montreal in December, and there will be they suspected that there will be an agreement on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And I think it is very important. I think that CITES has a role in this, plays a role. CITES has developed a strategic vision for 2030, and a number of indicators will be adopted at the COP that need to be aligned with the global biodiversity framework. I think it is important to have that discussion as well, and to embed the work of CITES in the wider biodiversity context. There is another element which I would like to highlight, which I think is important for us as well, is the discussion on this. The role that CITES should have in reducing the risk of future zoonotic diseases associated with international wildlife trade. And we very much support the work that intersessionally a working group has done on this matter. I think CITES rules are intended to protect species, not necessarily to address diseases or other public and animal health issues, but nevertheless, we strongly believe that CITES should be encouraged to work with the relevant organizations under One Health, such as the World Organization for Animal Health, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. These are processes and organizations that are working beyond under the umbrella of One Health, and in this sense, we very much support this discussion, this process. Finally, just to mention very briefly that the rules and the listings are not effective unless there is a proper implementation and enforcement. And there are many points on the agenda of the CITES COP about enforcement and implementation. And we believe that these are very important. And in this sense, we are very keen on keeping our support to partner countries. As you may know, the EU and the Commission in particular is a main donor of partner countries on both fighting wildlife trafficking, but also implementation of wildlife trade rules. We have the opportunity in the revision of the EU Wildlife Action Plan in looking into these issues and other related matters. And we are very keen to have this conversation from now to the start of the COP, including in the context of the revision of the Wildlife Action Plan, in order to ensure that the rules are properly implemented and we are effective in fighting wildlife trafficking, which is very impactful negative form of organized crime, having impact on livelihoods, on rule of law, and also on biodiversity, of course. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez, for your presentation and the oversight of what you are doing so far. I have to say that I'm very disappointed to hear, or not hear, about elephants. So not great news there, but I assume we will have many questions for you later, and I really hope that you will take the comments made by Ms. Daniela Freyer and the European Parliament on board as well. But I will now give the floor to my colleague Ville Niinisto, who will be telling us about the ENVI draft motion for a resolution on the EU strategic objectives for the CITES COP. Ville, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A pleasure for me to be here this morning to discuss how we can, as the Parliament, be also pushing for a more ambitious outcome in the CITES conference. Obviously, if you look at the broader context, I didn't hear all of the presentations this morning. I had another meeting, but I had the possibility to remotely hear what the Commission was saying. And I think we really need to understand also the broader context where we still have the biodiversity loss of habitat, and wildlife trade, illegal trade being a part of kind of like a driving force behind some of that what is happening in the deterioration of the living conditions for endangered species. So I think there needs to be more action on CITES to stop the kind of like economic incentives in driving the loss of biodiversity and the endangerment of many species. And that means that in the draft motion already by the Parliament, we have a lot of focus on implementation, compliance, enforcement. There is increased protection for whistleblowers, inadequate enforcement of bans and restrictions, and also the recognition of international wildlife crime as a serious organized crime. So we have focused on these issues already in the draft report. And also when it comes to the Parliament's role, we are still starting now the negotiations on the draft resolution in the staff level, so the political negotiations come after that, so you have a chance to affect also the outcome. So I'm happy to hear comments from all of you on how we should push for a more ambitious EU position. Some concrete comments that we have already included. We have species-specific matters included in our draft report. We have the sharks, we have the big cats, and trade in live African elephants. So they have been already included, that we fully support, or want the Commission to fully support and actively advocate the inclusion of all African elephants in Appendix 1 of CITES. And also when it comes to the big cats, we urge all parties to prohibit their trade in the 5 species in the Panthera genus, that is tigers, lions, jaguars, leopards, and snow leopards, which have an unfavorable conservation status varying from near threatened to the endangered. And on the shark specifically, there is also a proposal to include the requiem sharks in Appendix 2, and also hammerhead sharks as a whole family, as Commission proposes for a Council decision in Appendix 2, that we support that. Additionally, maybe I will just also add that we have already included aspects that we need to also within the EU, review and expand the existing legislation regulating the wildlife trade to reduce illegal trade by making it illegal to import, export, sell, acquire, or buy wild animals or plants that are taken, possessed, transported, or sold in violation of the law of the country of origin or transit. and also that EU member states should establish a EU-wide positive list of exotic animals that can be kept as pets without harm to populations in the wild and to European biodiversity, and also urging the Commission and member states to take urgent action in the framework of its commitments in the EU biodiversity strategy to ban the import of hunting trophies. So that is also included here. Also some comments about CITES strategic vision and the broader biodiversity goals. Basically, I think it's very important that we make all the addition to the appendixes in CITES that have a solid claim. So I urge the Commission to look at also those proposals that they have not insofar co-sponsored, and I think the Parliament has a role here to play as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ville. Kiitos. I think there's a good proposal now from the European Parliament, as far as I hear, and I'm very curious what the European Commission is doing with that. But first, I open the floor for questions and debates, and I would like to start with Francisco.
Yes, I'll focus on the presentation of Mr. Rodrigues, because it was positive that the Commission said that we need a clear framework for trade, but he started, I think, in a bit concerning way, stating the importance of the economics around the trade of these animals, and well, I find that a bit worrying. Although obviously I find it's very important for the Commission to have a better framework for the trade of live African animals, for example. And it was not clear the position of the Commission. He was saying that he will try to strike a deal at COP19, but if it cannot be made, he can push to COP20. But there's a working document that has been submitted by Benin, Burkina Faso, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Liberia, Niger, Senegal, and Togo that has a clear proposal, and it proposes the revision of the resolution conference 10.10 and recommends that all live trades in wild African elephants be limited to in situ conservation only within their natural and historic range. This also reflects the position of EU-CN SSC African Elephant Specialist Group, as well as the majority of African elephant range states. I don't know if he has a position, or the Commission has already a position regarding this proposal. And I would also like to understand the Commission perspective on soft power, because we shouldn't be trying to please everyone, and we should look at this at was my colleague said, at a bigger perspective, looking at the biodiversity perspective. And so in the end, we should have a role also by being soft power, and in this way trying to really push up for a better legal framework. So I would like to understand if there's any position on this by the Commission, or if they are working on it.
Well, thank you, Francisco. Mr. Rodrigues, do you have an answer for us? Because I'm very curious.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions and for the opportunity to clarify. If you look at the document that has been submitted on trading live elephants from the EU, there are different elements in there, and one of the elements is a very important one, is the reservation annotations. I think there are still different perspectives and interpretations from different parties. We find it possible to find an agreement at this conference of the parties on this matter, which is a very important one. On the rest, overall, on the rules of the current rules on trading live elephants, well, I think it is important to realize that if we try to find a solution that only serves the views and the purposes of some range states, we will alienate further other range states, and we will really aggravate the division that we have seen very clearly at the last COP in CITES. I wonder if this is what the EU, as one of the parties which is clearly for a working, a functioning multilateral system, we would like to see that. We would like to create more division, or we would like to find solutions that work for biodiversity and at the same time are transparent, are scientifically based, and we have a proper debate, and it's not only about creating division about among range states. We have seen at the last COP, and we have heard a lot of concerns about this matter. Earlier this year, there was a transfer of 22 elephants from Namibia to zoo in United Arab Emirates, which was completely untransparent, was done on the basis of the interpretation of the parties involved of those rules, on the rules that are at the moment in CITES. And it was criticized by many, but this took place under Appendix 1. So Namibia is of the view that they can trade under Appendix 1 with live elephants. And this is what they have done. And we believe that this is something that we need to look at, because this situation is really not good. This trade has happened with in a very untransparent manner. It has also been criticized by the World Association on Zoos and Aquaria, which has a policy on this matter. I think there is a need to look into things in a really robust way by moving the populations that are in Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. We would not solve this issue. The trade that has happened a few months ago would happen again because it was under Appendix 1. So I'm trying to say that the issue is complex and needs time to discuss, and it's not something that can be arranged quickly with some quick fix. So that's why we believe that we need more time and we need an intersessional period to discuss among all interested parties, and that the principles that should guide this trade that happens in very exceptional circumstances, I have to say, has to be really transparency and scientifically based processes. So I think I hope this clarifies. So as much as we want to progress at COP19, we will be keen to engage and to progress as much as possible. But we believe that for some aspects of the discussion, we will need more time. About the proposals that have been mentioned.
I'm sorry, can you be brief, please?
Yes,
because we have a lot of other presentations on our program.
Yeah, I'm finishing. I just wanted to say that for the rest of the proposals that have been mentioned, we will of course look at them, and we will look at them with the perspective of the CITES criteria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We go to the next. I think we will combine the first ask the questions and then the answers. First one is Caroline Roos.
Merci, Anya.
Very much, Anya. In your presentation, which I would like to say thank you for, by the way, you've spoken about frogs and as pets, catching frogs as pets. I wanted to talk about frogs again, but from a different angle. We know that Europe is the largest importer of frogs' legs. At least 70% are caught wild. And this has created a domino effect of extinction. Since the 1970s, problem in Bangladesh and in Indonesia since the 80s. It's only recently that scientists have been warning that wild populations were also, or will disappear in Turkey by 2032 if we carry on like this. So with this in mind, what is Europe planning? At COP19, will Europe be raising this issue of the non-sustainable commerce of frogs' legs, and will there be a proposal to include this on one of the lists, or what other measures do you think you'll be taking at COP19? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Before we go to Mr. Rodriguez for the answer, I would like to ask a question myself. I'm very curious, Mr. Rodriguez, you mentioned something about co-sponsorship of the rain stage. Can you clarify which proposals for co-sponsorship from the range stage you didn't support? And I have a question for Daniela Freyer as well. You said that the EU positive list should be incorporated in CITES as a matter of urgency, and you mentioned also the member states. I'm very happy that the Netherlands yesterday presented a positive list for mammals. Could you maybe tell us something more about why it is so important to have a positive list? But first we go to Mr. Rodriguez, and please be brief.
Yes, thank you very much. On frog legs, we are aware of the report that has been published very recently. Unfortunately, it was too late to be considered in any way for the COP19. And as with any other trade that is and any other evidence that can indicate unsustainable trade in which the EU is involved, we would be very keen to look into this towards COP20 and consider the evidence that is available. On the co-sponsorship of range states, we have received a number of requests. I don't have them at hand at the moment, but if I remember correctly, we received requests from hippopotamus and requests also from Peru. For some other species. I'm not sure I am comprehensive on this, but we have received a few requests for co-sponsoring, and some of them really arrived very late, and we have tried to engage with the proponents to improve the proposals and to ask questions about it, and there was no time really to conclude this process. And as I said in my presentation, the fact that we have not co-sponsored doesn't mean that we are not going to support at the COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniela.
Yeah, thank you very much for that questions. Well, we are not suggesting that the positive list is at this stage integrated in the CITES. I mean, this would also be an option possibly for the future, but first we think that really that individual EU member states and the EU at the EU level should adopt a positive list for a number of reasons. Firstly, for animal welfare reasons, because wild animals that are non-domesticated are often not suitable to be kept as pets. Also, of course, for conservation reasons, because many species traded as pets are still captured in the wild, in the millions actually, if you look at ornamental fish, reptiles, amphibians, but also mammals and birds are still captured in the wild for the pet trade. So this harms the populations in the range states. Another conservation problem is, of course, that species can get invasive alien species here in the EU and create problems for our native biodiversity. And last but not least, the pandemic has shown us that there are considerable health risks related to the wildlife trade and the close contact between people and humans. So we think these are all good reasons why the EU really needs to strengthen their regulations on the trade in wild animals. Thanks.
Thank you. Daniela, we got a lot of questions from the room for Mr. Rodriguez. Do you have a suggestion for him as well? Or do you want to think about it and maybe come back to that on at a later stage? Okay, let's do that. Thank you so much. We are now going to the second part of this meeting. So I have to find my notes here. And that's the issue of trophy hunting. That is very controversial, not only for the animal cruelty it involves, but also due to concerns about biodiversity. Momentum is growing to take action to curb hunting trophy imports, and today we will explore how trophy hunting places unsustainable pressure on species and whether this practice really does make a significant contribution to wildlife conservation as claimed by its proponents. I will now give the floor to Mr. Rodriguez again, who will tell us how to reconcile the EU trophy hunting practices and the biodiversity strategy for 2030. And after that, we will go to Dr. Joanna Swape. But first, Mr. Rodriguez, you have the floor, and I hope you can be as brief as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, well, I will try to be brief. Trophy hunting is subject of a very intense debate and very polarized positions, and I think it warrants questioning from ethical, from biodiversity perspective. But I think sufficient evidence is key in this debate, to use the evidence that we have at hand, so that we can be sure that our policies and practices contribute to conservation and do not lead to biodiversity loss. And the position of the EU has always been to rely on the advice of competent international bodies, as well as the scientific advice through the scientific review group, so the group of scientific authorities of the EU member states, who play an important role in the wildlife trade regulations. The EU has been working on the assumptions that well-managed trophy cattle may or can generate tangible benefits for local communities, and this approach and the broad international support for it is reflected in a resolution that was proposed by the EU in 2016 and was approved by consensus at the CITES COP, and is at the moment well-managed trophy hunting is a tool that is being used by a number of range states as a part of conservation tools. Ensuring a return of benefits to local communities can create an incentive for local communities to continue to protect this species. That's the rationale behind this practice. So working with local communities in any case is a key element of conservation, and we, through our EU-funded programs in partner countries related to biodiversity, we focus on inclusive, community-based and innovative approaches to promote decent incomes for rural communities that have to live with wildlife. A flagship project that we have is the Nature Africa initiative, that is expected to mobilize more than 1 billion euros. So in the context of hunting trophies, the EU law goes beyond the protection required by CITES. We have stricter measures, and import in the EU is only authorized when it's scientifically demonstrated that the import will not be detrimental for the species and where it contributes to species conservation, and as well as the livelihoods of local communities. We have a species country-specific approach, so we have a case-by-case analysis, and we are able to intervene and stop imports whenever this is not sustainable. So at the moment, we do not allow imports of hunting trophies from a range of species, and 11 countries actually. So we are, however, at the moment, in the context of the revision of the Wildlife Action Plan, we are keen to improving and to looking into how this is regulated, and to improve and further regulate this matter. As new evidence is being generated, I think we need to keep this under check and ensure that our practice is based on sound science and is transparent, so that it is clear on what basis decisions are taken. So we are very keen also on engaging in this discussion on this important matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez. Our last presentation of today is given by Dr. Joanna Swaip, Senior Director of Public Affairs at the Humane Society International European Office, and she will give us an insight on how to strengthen the EU regime for the import of hunting trophies. Dear Jo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anya. And thank you so much to the Intergroup for this opportunity to discuss the EU's role in trophy hunting, and also why the import regime for hunting trophies needs to be strengthened. Before I go any further, I just want to point out that only a tiny minority of EU citizens, and also even a relatively small minority of hunters, are actually engaged in trophy hunting at all. While opinion polling indicates that around 80% of EU citizens are opposed to this outdated colonial practice. Can I have the next slide, please? I want to start off by asking an important question of whether the import of hunting trophies of endangered species is actually compatible with EU commitments to protect global biodiversity. My answer to this is probably quite unsurprisingly a resounding no. Leaving aside all of the ethical and animal welfare arguments against this practice, the truth is that trophy hunting puts an additional pressure on populations of threatened species that are already facing a multitude of threats for their survival, including habitat loss and degradation, climate change, wildlife trade, poaching, and human-wildlife conflict. Indeed, it's fair to say that recreational killing of threatened and protected animals for trophies undermines the EU's efforts to meet its objectives set down in the EU biodiversity strategy and also the other EU legislation that's aimed to protect wildlife. The European Commission has claimed that legal, well-regulated trophy hunting programs play an important role in delivering benefits for both wildlife conservation and for the livelihoods and well-being of indigenous and local communities living next to wildlife. I want to briefly debunk some of these claims about regulated trophy hunts. There is a long history of a lack of proper regulation of oversight when it comes to trophy hunting, even where trophy hunting is legal and follows management guidelines. There is evidence of population declines, indirect negative effects on populations. There have been biologically unsustainable quotas set, an offtake of restricted individuals, such as female animals and cubs. We got issues about poor population estimates, quotas that have been they've been assigned at incorrect spatial scales. There's been a lack of transparency, and also there's limited evidence that trophy hunting really does provide meaningful conservation benefits. So we believe that the regulations are insufficient to ensure populations aren't negatively impacted. Moreover, the conservation benefits of trophy hunting are also overstated by its proponents. Can I have the next slide, please? And what about the claims about livelihoods? Who actually benefits from trophy hunting? The trophy hunting lobby is keen to play on our white, privileged heartstrings by arguing that their activities help poor indigenous communities in Africa and elsewhere. Yet, there's ample evidence that little money actually trickles down to individual local community members or households. For example, a campfire study, which was carried out in parts of Zimbabwe, reported that 90 to 100% of households never benefited from part-time or full-time employment as a result of trophy hunting. So job opportunities for locals are often limited, temporary, and low-paying. Meat come from the slain animals is often cited as the biggest indirect benefit of trophy hunting for communities, but this is also not distributed equally. And all the other benefits from trophy hunting, purported benefits, are distributed unequally, with few people in the community actually profiting. Trophy hunting also, the programs for trophy hunting, they also perpetuate wealth inequalities. In other words, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And there's a great lack of transparency on the distribution of resources and benefits. So where does the money actually go from trophy hunting? As a recent report released last week on elephant trophy hunting in Botswana pointed out, funds from trophy hunting elephants, this is specifically with regard to elephants, tend to remain with wealthy hunting operators, the boards of community-based organizations, business moguls, and those who are politically connected. Can I have the next slide, please? People often assume that because species such as African lions and elephants are endangered and protected for trade by CITES, it shouldn't be possible to import their trophies into Europe. This isn't the case. Under the framework of the EU wildlife trade regulations and the Habitats Directive, hunters can still bring in their trophies of CITES-listed species into the EU. Of course, they can't do this without the necessary paperwork. EU legislation does require that legally obtained hunting trophies of specific species can only be imported into the EU after a member state has issued an import permit. And as we also heard from Jorge, there are a number of species all on Annex A and 6 species on Annex B. Crucially, when issuing import permits, the member states must verify that these imports will not be detrimental to the conservation of the species concerned, at least as this concerns the extent of the territory of the relevant populations. But there's a problem here. We are not aware of there being a really transparent process in place to ensure that import permits are issued based on a rigorous and science-based review of non-detriment findings conducted by the Commission or member states themselves. In this regard, we find it concerning that in some cases in recent years, the EU has established positive opinions and lifted negative opinions for species such as African elephants, leopards, and lions, and populations in areas where scientific data has demonstrated that there have been serious population declines, issue with poaching, and lack of governance. On top of all this, at present, the legal requirement for hunting trophies to be accompanied by import permits relates only to the Annex A species and the 6 Annex B species. Hunting trophies from all other species are exempted from this rule. So effectively, the EU isn't really in a position right now to be able to ascertain that most trophy hunting imports are non-detrimental to the conservation of species and legal at the point of origin. And yet, those hunting trophies, they keep on coming. Can I have the next slide, please? In 2020, HSA Europe, we made a comprehensive analysis of CITES trophy hunting data over a 5-year period. It was the period of time when the most data was, well, the only data was available. We wanted to find out that how many wild animals or their parts or derivatives of these animals were imported into the EU. The results of this study demonstrated that second to the USA, The EU is the second largest importer of animal trophies in the world. And since 2016, the EU has been the largest importer of lion trophies in the world. Almost 15,000 trophies from 73 different CITES-listed mammal species have been imported, and there has been an increase of imported trophies of nearly 40% between 2014 and 2018. Next slide, please. The top 5 EU member states to import mammalian hunting trophies were Germany, Spain, Denmark, Austria, and Sweden. I hope today that you are suitably shocked by the numbers of endangered mammals that are being killed for trophies. It's clear that a key driver of global biodiversity loss is the direct exploitation of wildlife by humans. And trophy hunting is one of the most egregious forms of wildlife exploitation, allowing a minority of individuals to go and kill endangered species for their own perverse pleasure, and to hang the body parts of these animals on their walls is a practice that the majority of EU citizens finds morally abhorrent and completely unsustainable in the light of the current biodiversity crisis. Next slide, please. One way in which the EU can be motivated to take action is if member states unilaterally start deciding that they do no longer want to be complicit in the trophy hunting industry. In 2015, France already decided that it didn't want to import any more lion trophies. And in 2016, the Netherlands, my own home country, decided to no longer issue import permits for over 200 species, effectively banning imports. It was effectively as simple as that. No more permits, no more imports. Earlier this year, the Belgian Federal Parliament unanimously adopted a resolution calling for their government to take similar action. And there have also been political moves in Spain, Italy, and Germany to restrict the import of hunting trophies. Even in Finland, there's been a resolution calling for similar action. Next slide, please. The evaluation of the EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking is a golden opportunity for the EU to reconsider its policies in the management of the trade in trophy hunting. So I'm very pleased to hear Jorge confirm that this will be addressed. One also mustn't forget that there is also a proved link between illegal wildlife trade and trophy hunting. Last year, for example, 33 EU and Vietnamese citizens were prosecuted in Poland for laundering 38 white rhino trophies into illegal trade. Next slide, please. I'm going to bring my presentation to a close, and you'll be quite thankful, with a few concrete recommendations, which we have made together with fellow NGOs in a new report. In the absence of an EU ban on trophy hunting imports, we urge the following actions. Firstly, the issuing of import permits to the EU for leopard and elephant trophies should be suspended as a precautionary approach. Annual quotas for leopard and elephant hunting trophies remain worryingly high and represent a threat to populations in light of the lack of reliable data and current management plans. Secondly, the Commission must review the scientific review group's processes for determining its opinions for trophy-hunted species and ensure that they are transparent, precautionary, and science-based. Thirdly, a review of Member States' scientific authorities' activities is needed. Scientific authorities should only be issuing permits when reliable, empirical, and verifiable evidence clearly demonstrate that all requirements are met. Fourthly, the requirement for import permits for hunting trophies should be extended to all species in Annex B of the EU Wildlife Trade Regulations by removing the exemption for personal and household effects for hunting trophies from Article 15 of the Commission Regulation 865 from 206. The issuing of import permits is the only means by which EU member states can ensure that trophy hunting trophies are of a legal and sustainable origin. Fifthly, guidelines must be developed that shift the burden of proof to the applicant and the exporting country, and clearly mandate the minimum documentation that they need to provide. When data and documentation are insufficient, permits shouldn't be issued at all. Sixthly, it is important to adopt interim safeguarding legal provisions on trophy hunting killing methods that are consistent with the principle of minimizing suffering that is incorporated into the rules applying to the deliberate killing of non-wild mammals. And finally, the EU must adopt evidence-based and precautionary positions on trophy hunting at international fora, such as CITES, which reflect these recommendations. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch if we've got the last 15 minutes to respond to them.
Yes, thank you so much, Jo. Thank you for your inspiring presentation with beautiful pictures and clear recommendations as well. I will immediately give the floor to Martin Buschmann. Martin?
Thank you, Anja. Thank you for the presentation. First, I just have two questions, little questions, and due to the lack of time. What are the main endangered and protected species that are imported into the EU as trophies? And the second one is, what are the main species that are exported by trophy hunters from the EU? Thank you so much.
Yes, please, Jo. I think this is a question for you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the top 5 species that are imported into the EU, they're actually both African and European species in descending order. So 21% of imports are from Hartmann's mountain zebra, 12% are from Chacma baboons, 9% are from American black bears, 7% are from brown bears. So often these are coming from Russia, and also read recently that Polish trophy hunters are still now going to Russia despite the war to kill brown bears. And 6% are the African elephant. But we mustn't also forget that there are other critically endangered and charismatic species such as polar bears and lions that are also coming in to the EU as well. As regards the exported species, we're not just an importer of species, we're also an exporter of species. CITES data is a little bit difficult because they can end up also being re-exports that we're seeing. The main species that are going out are actually, some of them are native species that are protected strictly under the Habitats Directive. So 40% of those are, the brown bear. But then you've got species like leopards, about 88% of the species being exported are leopards. Hippopotamus, which is incredibly relevant, obviously, with the proposal for hippos to be, uplisted on CITES. Hartmann's mountain zebras, they also feature in that list. And very importantly, for the EU, 6% of the animals that are exported from the EU are grey wolves. And so we mustn't forget that foreign trophy hunters, and you can see in hunting fairs, excursions also being offered for people to come to Europe, often American trophy hunters, to kill animals in Europe and export them. So it's not necessarily European hunters that are killing these, they're often hunters from elsewhere that are traveling to Europe as European hunters travel to Africa to kill these animals. But thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the room. Are there more questions here? I don't see any questions. We still have a few minutes left, so I come back to Daniela. You wanted to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one issue that was addressed both by us and by the Commission, and also, I think, of importance to parliamentarians, and there was a question about is there trade in live African elephants? So I think this will probably take quite some center stage at the CITES conference. Also, it generated a lot of publicity at the previous meeting, and I would just like to remind the Commission that this issue was debated at length at the previous CITES conference 3 years ago, and actually that it was agreed by the CITES parties to restrict imports of live elephants, at least from some populations, to, well, just to institute conservation programs within Africa, so not to allow any exports outside of Africa. And actually, it was mentioned that you can't please everyone, and this issue might be controversial, but just a reminder that it is actually just a very small minority of African countries that has a different view on this issue. The large majority agrees to entirely ban this trade from all populations, and it's actually just 2 countries that is interested in this trade. The major exporters are Zimbabwe, which exported about more than 120 live elephants in the last decade, and Namibia. So it's really just a minority interest, and we think it's problematic to reopen this discussion if, as this was already agreed at the COP18, and the EU should not be contributing to weakening the regulations on this issue. Also, we would encourage the EU to separate between these different issues. There's this, the export of live elephants, but also the issue of reservation to annotations, but which could be agreed actually, as Jorge Romero said quickly at this meeting, but it's important to distinguish between these 2 really different issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I have one last question for the European Commission. We heard from the presentation of Ms. Swaib that there was a lack of scientific evidence on conservation benefits and important in the impact on livelihoods. What is your view on the unequal distribution of benefits in these communities? Can you comment on that? And we don't have a lot of time left, so again, please be brief.
Yes, thank you very much. So, I mean, we are very keen, as I said, to look into any new evidence that is available on this. We need to be sure that the practice that we are doing is we keep under review, and that the objectives of biodiversity conservation and the return of benefits to local communities and so on are actually happening and have a positive impact. So we are happy to review, and this is what we are doing in the context of the revision of the Wildlife Action Plan, to look into this in more detail and see if this is working really within the parameters that are intended. I just want to mention to stress that if I'm allowed, in the response to the comment by Daniela, our intention on traded live elephants is certainly to strengthen the rules, not to weaken them. I mean, and the starting point is the discussion we had at the last COP. That's absolutely our intention. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much indeed. That was very brief. Thank you. To conclude this this interesting session of the Animal Welfare Intergroup, I would like to start by thanking all the speakers of today. We learned a lot today. We learned, for instance, that the EU plays an important and increasing role in trophy hunting. We learned that trophy hunting is not beneficial for local communities and, of course, also not beneficial for the animals involved. And we learned also that there is a lot of work ahead of us for the preparation for the CITES COP, the Conference of Parties 19. As an initiator and co-rapporteur on the ENVI draft motion for a resolution on this topic, I'm looking forward to work with all of our speakers today. As I said, there's a lot of work ahead. We need to make a strong position from the European Parliament, as strong as possible. And we definitely need to stop the exploitation of many, many species and help to save and restore biodiversity. But also, as we heard, from an animal welfare and public health perspective, that's very important. And I hope, really hope, that the European Commission will follow the NGO's recommendations that we heard today. Just an announcement on the next Intergroup session. The Animal Welfare Intergroup will hold its next session on, after the summer break on Thursday, 15th of September, which is likely to focus on animal welfare in sustainability labels, labeling minimum standards and trade. Until then, I wish everyone who attended this meeting here in Strasbourg, as well as everybody watching us online, a great and relaxing summer break. Thank you.